They say we're loud, opinionated, afraid, telling us to hush, dim our historical light. But darlings, we're the heartbeat, sharp and keen, unveiling the truth behind the silver screen.
History harpies, hear us roar. Through the ages we explore. Fashion, film, and TV's lore. Spilling tea, wanting more.
From silent films to reality shows, haze, we dissect the details in a critical daze. The
I am
hemorrhoids,
Lauren,
the heroes,
and I'm Christine,
the villains,
and welcome to History Harpies, Episode 1. Christine and I are professional historians. We've both been teaching for about 2 decades at a research university. We've both written several books, but we love popular culture, and we decided it was about time to share our ideas with the world.
Because we think we have a very particular set of skills, which is that we both love, as Lauren says, popular culture of the present, but we also study the past. And so we have a good ability, we think, to bring these two things together.
Christine and I have been friends for some time, and we know each other in several different contexts, and we have a very, very special bond. And it is unusual, in my experience, to find somebody who understands you as a mom, understands you as a scholar, and also understands you as a fellow lover of all things popular culture. So after many, many years talking about these things, we decided to come together and, as enthusiastic Gen Xers, put out a podcast for not only our peers and our colleagues and our friends, but also for just the general population of pop culture and history lovers.
Because Lauren and I, like a lot of Gen Xers out there, we spent a lot of time watching television as kids, as teenagers, and then it just never stopped. And we both love movies, we both love fashion, we both love music. And I know this might be a surprise to some of you out there, but it's not always the case that professors and professors of history really enjoy those kinds of things or try to keep up with what's been going on.
So Christine, for our listeners, how would you differentiate us from the many, many wonderful pop culture podcasts out there that critique pop culture, that do episodic reviews and the like?
That's a great question. And of course, we love so many sites and podcasts, web pages that talk about recaps of TV, that talk about fashion and music. But what we like to think that we can do that is different, that is unique, is that we can kind of fill in some of the blanks of things that have happened in the past. And one of the things that we talk a lot about, I just repeated a lot, is we like to think about things that are happening now and how it is that they are flavored by the past, or that something in the past might help us to understand or appreciate a little bit more some of the pop culture going on now.
So when Christine and I were thinking about names for this podcast, we landed on History Harpies, and I'm going to turn it over to Christine as our medievalist and somebody who has a unique explanation skill set of talking about etymology to tell us more about the origin of the harpy.
We might think of harping on things as related to the word harpy, and basically harpies are what we call a hybrid creature. That is something that is part one thing and part another. And in the ancient world, there are lots of hybrid creatures running around. The one that is probably most familiar to people is the Sphinx in Egypt, the body of a lion and the head of a man. And a harpy in the ancient world was the body of a bird and the head of a woman. And they tended to be kind of screechy. And there's a myth where harpies are sort of gathered around a guy who is simply trying to eat his dinner, and the harpies keep stealing his food. And now we tend to think of harpies as, Lauren, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Total bitches.
Total bitches, who are harping on things, who are being, again, sort of screechy and opinionated and want to let you know exactly what they think.
and many think should really just shut up. So we are not going to shut up. We are going to continue to harp, but even more importantly, analyze and debate and critique the things that we love. And if that is harping to some, then so be it.
And again, it is going to be harping with a flavor of the past, because we always like to think, has this been done before? Is this familiar?
And in fact, one of the ideas for this podcast is that Christine and I often watch many, many films, television shows, other things together. But we come away thinking we liked it or we didn't like it, but it really reminds us of this other thing that is maybe 30 or 40 years older, and then we see something in media that will say, wow, this was brand new. Wow, this was so progressive. Wow, this was the first time that this has ever been done.
Ever.
And in fact, that is rarely the case.
It is rarely the case.
So our format is to discuss a current text in popular culture, current content, but then to situate it within an older piece of art, an older film, an older piece of fashion, an older television show, and to compare the two and think about the ways in which certain depictions and ideas have changed.
Because I think one of the things that both Lauren and I have experienced, both with our own kids, but then also definitely with our students, is when we will talk about something that is older, again, a movie, a piece of music, with our students, and they try it out, and they're like, oh my God, thank you, that was so fantastic, I loved it. And so basically a big part of our podcast is that Lauren and I want to spread the love.
Spread the love.
Spread the love of the past, of pop culture.
And again, as Gen X folks, although we might not think of some of our products as quote old, they will be old to some of our listeners, no doubt. And many of the texts that we are going to talk about are beloved texts from our childhood, or beloved texts of our parents or grandparents, or those sorts of things that we grew up with hearing about. And so there's a lot of lineage, there's a lot of sort of, ancestral collectivity.
We are reaching into the dawn of time to talk about spike heels.
Right, exactly. All right, so before we start on our segment, which today will be on sex work films, just wanted to touch base with you, Christine. How has your week been going?
My week has been going okay. It is a little bit of an adjustment after spring break, as you know. And I am managing my two teenagers as usual. How about you?
My week has been both challenging and rewarding. My middle son, accepted admission at a college, which was an incredibly stressful process, which any listener who has been through that will know. And now we get to embark upon having two children in college, which is truly excellent. And I am excited about that, but also ready for all the pre-college stress that is to come.
And then you get to do it all over again.
All over again.
All over again.
Yes. So for those of you who are familiar with Anora, you can maybe fast forward through some of this.
Tune it out.
But Anora has lingered in the news for many, many reasons, not just for when it came out as a film and the sort of usual film criticism or reception it received, but then the Oscar season, the aftermath, and a lot of the controversy surrounding the film, some of which had nothing to do with the film content. And Christine, what did we think of Anora when we saw it?
I hate to say it, but this is a good way to begin our discussion today about sex worker films. We did not like Anora. We thought Anora was ridiculous, and I hate to say it, just plain bad.
Anora fucking sucked. Anora fucking sucked, and I'm sorry, it just did. And I really was a waste of time, and I would like my, however long that thing was, 2 hours back.
I think we fast forwarded maybe through some of the lap dances, though. Don't you think so?
We may have.
We may have.
Yeah, we may have.
So for those of you who have not seen Anora, just to give a really quick recap, Anora is about a young woman sex worker in Brooklyn. I believe it's Brighton Beach, if I remember correctly. And she works at a strip club. And she begins a relationship with the son of a Russian oligarch. The son's name is Ivan. And spoiler alert, after a very whirlwind romance, they marry. And the choice of them to get married is not looked upon particularly favorably by his parents, who send a few minions, I think is really the only word we can use.
Henchmen,
toughs, to come and break up this brand new relationship. And so it is a movie that actually covers, I would say, only a few days, actually, in Anora's life. Again, there is very much a kind of whirlwind quality to the movie. And we won't tell you exactly how it ends, but we had very many thoughts about Anora. And actually, I'm going to ask Lauren a question to keep on. Do we know why Anora, the character, is involved in sex work?
We do not. We do not know why she's involved in sex work. The thing we do know is that she's been doing strip club work for a while now. She has several customers, several regulars. She's comfortable in her position. She's somewhat of a mentor to some of the other girls, but we do not know why she has chosen this of necessity, for financial security. We have absolutely no idea why. So this is something that is not asked or answered in the film, and again leads to even more questions as her personal journey continues with Yvonne.
And one of the reasons why this seems to be important is because it's hard to understand to what extent we're supposed to understand her story as a fairy tale. Right. To what extent she is in sort of extreme circumstances in which she is in poverty. We do see her apartment that she lives in with her sister. It is very clear that she does want the luxury that attends to this very, very wealthy young man and her relationship and her eventual marriage with him. But it isn't really clear, right, if this relationship is saving her from anything, that it's not a Cinderella story necessarily. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And the experiences that she has with Yvonne in New York and then later in Vegas are certainly exceptional in that he is so wealthy. Mm-hmm. He has a private plane. Mm-hmm. He is treating her and her friends and his friends to whatever they want. Clubs, drinks,
jewelry, drugs.
All of it. But we don't know even whether she's had an experience like this before.
That's
with
true.
Another wealthy patron, mm-hmm. or anything like this. His house, which is his parents' house, is pretty incredible and modern, and certainly the house of someone of incredible means. And she enjoys being there, but we do not know whether this is, again, a way of lifting her out of poverty, lifting her family out of poverty. The scene with her sister is brief, mm-hmm. and
quite brief,
difficult
mm-hmm.
to determine what the content of that relationship is. So we do not fully understand Anora's own status.
And we do know she is absolutely not a high-class courtesan, right? This is not a high-class escort. She's working in a fairly skeevy strip club, but nevertheless, there's all indications that she's making a fair amount of money doing so. We see her do many lap dances, perhaps too many, which we can talk about in a minute. And she does begin to spend time outside of the club with Yvonne, and perhaps she has done this in the past, although we don't see it. So there is a real confusion, right, about her sort of socioeconomic status, about why she's doing it in the first place. Does she ever intend to stop? What pushed her into it? And I guess the next question that attaches to that Do we think that she is genuinely in love with Yvonne? Again, in terms of this being a fairy tale, a romance story, a Cinderella story, what sense do we have of her emotions?
We have none.
None. None, I think, is the answer to my own question.
None, because while we know that she is taken with the material surroundings of Yvonne, we do not know very much about his own personality. We do not get a lot of texture in the exchanges between them. We do not see the sex between them as particularly intimate or romantic or even connected in a sense that's fulfilling to the viewer, or at least these two viewers. So it is again puzzling why the film would be seen by so many critics as humane and deep in analysis and deep in understanding of this young woman, while really she could be a cocktail waitress. She could be
working at McDonald's.
Right. She could be doing kind of anything and meet this guy, and the same outcome would
be exactly the same.
Yeah.
It would be exactly the same. And that leads to really what was one of my biggest complaints about Anora. And it fit to me within a bigger paradigm where things that can be shopped as sex positive, right? Things that can be shopped in a more narrow way as thoughtful, generous depictions of sex work, they can just start to look exploitative. And in the sense that we see so much nudity. There are so many explicit sex scenes, and sex scenes that are, as you say, Lauren, that are not necessarily intimate. And again, we're not talking about needing to see the two of them rolling in the ocean with violins. No. Right? That's not what we're talking about.
But the sex scenes are repetitive, they're unimaginative,
they're mechanistic,
they're undifferentiated.
Same
old lap dances over and over. And her performances for him, even in a more intimate setting, really mirror the lap dances she has given other customers and him in the strip club. So there's no sense that she has any kind of special connection to him other than allowing him to, have sex with her and engaging in a full-on escort relationship rather than just being a stripper. But there's nothing about it that would give you any sense either that he is a more sensitive guy or that she is a more sensitive gal.
Well, but this then is, and we brought up before the issue that she really, in terms of the film, she could be doing any low-paying job, right? She could be working at fast food, whatever. And then it simply becomes an issue where we seem to be seeing her in with a great deal of sexually explicit content simply because someone wants to see her, wants to depict this over and over again. And because there is so much a tone of the film that she is being potentially rescued from sex work, it's not a film that defends sex work in that way. It simply isn't. We are supposed to think it is a good thing that she is marrying this incredibly wealthy young man who then will take her away from all of this. But by the same token, that juxtaposed with how many lap dances we see, how many sex scenes there are, I simply cycle back over and over that the reason this is a film about a sex worker is not to make a profound social statement about sex work. It is simply an excuse to show tits, to show sexually explicit scenes, because someone, who knows who, someone has an idea in their head that they want to see this over and over in what to me really is an exploitative way.
And interestingly, the film, there's lots of controversy about the lack of an intimacy coordinator. Mm-hmm. The idea that, in quote, real life, sex workers don't have intimacy coordinators, and so we get a real view of sex work. But I would push back and say that sex work can have all kinds of flavor, can have all kinds of diverse interpretations, can have all kinds of power dynamics, and can be expressive in a multitude of ways that this film just erases because it is so repetitive and it is so static on the level of depicting sexuality, which is an irony of the film that it is supposed to be representative of so much subtlety and humanity.
Yes, and that is what takes me back to the idea that we are seeing someone's fantasy, right? We're not seeing an interrogation of the working class. We're not seeing an interrogation, as you say, of different modes of sex work. There's, again, no distinct, right? We're seeing a sort of enhanced version of the girlfriend experience, but it's not that, because we are intended to think, I believe, that it is a good thing that she is with this man. And so, and the other thing we probably should point out before we move on and maybe talk about Pretty Woman for a minute is Lauren and I were both so amazed that this won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. And actually, while we watched the film, which we did together, we kept joking that the announcement of the nominations for Best Original Screenplay would have to focus on Anora just saying, fuck you, over and over and over again. But clearly, Lauren, we were wrong, and the Academy voters really responded to fuck you, no fuck you too.
Fuck you, asshole, get your fucking hands off me. That's the gist of Anora. And while I'm certainly not in any way a prude or have any problem with, this kind of language, use it all the time myself, I don't understand why they couldn't have had a few conversations that did not just include a string of obscenities over and over and over again with no description of what anyone was talking about. And the other thing is that while Yvonne and Anora are saying fuck you to each other, or you fucking bitch, or Anora says to her sex work colleagues, you jealous sluts, or whatever, there are no other characters in this film that have a sort of straight dialogue. It's the henchmen come back with fuck you, and everyone who's...
It is a universal experience.
Even the Russian oligarch parents, fuck you, that fucking bitch, why did he marry her? I don't know why no one can speak to one another in a way that, at least for the audience, would give them a little bit more of a sense of what's going on. And that is what took away many of the nuances of the relationships between Anora and the various people she's triangulating between, is that the monotony of the dialogue detracted from the diversity of the relationships.
Well, and I think a good comparison, and especially in defense of the idea that we're prudes who don't want to hear fuck you or look at sex scenes or whatever, I think a good comparison is, say, the Oscar that Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avary won for Best Original Screenplay for Pulp Fiction. Obviously a film that has fuck very often in it, and to me, again, a brilliant screenplay. And certainly I think Tarantino generally is such a good example of this, right? Where you can have unbelievably explicit language, and it can be brilliant with characterization and with scene setting. And we saw none of that in Anora. Just over and over again. It's such a repetitive movie.
Agreed. So I think if we were to think about Anora, the question of, is she the hooker with a heart of gold? That is a depiction in film that has long carried on through the 20th, 21st century.
Forever.
And we can think of Elizabeth Shue in Leaving Las Vegas, but because this comparison has come up in the press much, much more, we can think of Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. And the differences between Julia Roberts and Mikey Madison in Anora. So is Anora a hooker with a heart of gold?
I think that's a good question, and I think our answer has to be no, right? And that she's not the hooker who is being charitable, right, or saving orphans from burning buildings in a way that we have would see in much older films, right, making a noble sacrifice for her lover or something, right. We don't see anything like that, and in fact, right, the opposite is true. She understands that this marriage is incredibly difficult for her now in-laws, but she's going to hold on to it, right, fiercely, to have the benefits of being married to this man. And certainly in the exchanges that we see her with her co-workers at the strip club, the pretty much one or two times we see her with her sister, with the minions, she's just a bitch, right? We have no idea why she's a bitch. We have zero reason.
But she is a bitch, and she's very selfish, and we see her focusing on material concerns. She wants a fur, she wants a bigger diamond ring, she wants to live in the house, she wants to make sure she's going to be cared for, and we certainly do not see her saying to Yvonne, I'm so concerned about your feelings, I'm so concerned about this, hold your parents have over you, how can I make it better, how can I... That is just something
I'll keep working at the strip club and support us both.
No. It's transactional.
It's transactional.
It's clear that it's transactional. Yeah. And it's also clear that were he not a wealthy,
Were he working at McDonald's?
If he did not have a private plane, if he was not taking people to Vegas, she would be uninterested. Differently than, say, the Julia Roberts character.
Interesting point. Yeah, let's talk about Pretty Woman for a bit. Of course, another film about a sex worker. And actually, I believe that this week is the 35th anniversary of the release of Pretty Woman, which is amazing.
That is truly amazing.
And I'm sure Julia Roberts feels the same way, that it is just passed in a blink of an eye. As Lauren knows, I had never before watched Pretty Woman, but did watch it in anticipation of this episode.
And I really just was stunned and frankly questioned whether Christine and I could be friends anymore, because Pretty Woman is my love language, and I find it sort of appalling that Christine, as a Gen X person,
I know.
and as my friend for so long, had never seen Pretty Woman, and I didn't know whether she was even going to watch it for the pod, quite frankly, and I was surprised when I learned that she was watching it.
Well, unlike Anora, I am willing to make sacrifices for those that I love, and I have to say that I absolutely, and Lauren and I never disagree on movies, I absolutely hated Pretty Woman, although I did think that Richard Gere is a wonderful actor. And of course, another sex worker film that we could have watched is American Gigolo from the late, maybe 1979, 1980, with Richard Gere as a gigolo. I really hated Pretty Woman. I think it is a dated film. Not everything that we're going to be talking about on this pod is dated in the sense that it doesn't feel right anymore.
It doesn't hold up.
Pretty Woman is something I think that doesn't hold up. And one of the big contrasts, right, with Anora was too much nudity, too much sex, mechanistic sex, repetitive sex, right, Lauren, as you've said. What is remarkable about Pretty Woman is that it seems sexless. It seems sex-free. But do you think Julia Roberts in that film is a hooker with the heart of gold?
I do.
Oh, interesting. Say more.
So I think she is a hooker with a heart of gold because Richard Gere is so emotionally immature, unevolved, clearly can't maintain relationships, is completely focused on business, and it is through Julia Roberts and her wisdom and her beauty and whatever.
Her odd innocence.
Odd innocence.
Which persists even though she's a hooker on Hollywood Boulevard.
Well, I can suspend that disbelief. She is such a rockin' gal.
She's quite beautiful.
And she's so beautiful, and she has the best hair.
She does.
Rivaled only by Blake Lively now.
Yes, I agree with that.
She has the best hair, and he can only grow in his relationship with her. And by the end of the film, she, in my opinion, she would not have cared if he was a billionaire or not, and he had become somebody that she was truly in love with. So, and everyone loves her. right? Hector Elizondo loves her.
He was the best character in my
Laura
opinion.
San Giacomo loves her.
Everyone does.
Everyone.
The elevator boy loves her. Ralph
her.
Bellamy loves her.
She is just a lovey. And I love her. Love me some Julia Roberts. And the only people who don't love her are the shop women
who are bitches.
But of course, they
think
only love
she's
credit
poor.
cards. They only love credit cards.
Yes, they only love credit cards, and they think she's poor. Yeah. I mean, I will say, not that we're going to stray and start talking about Notting Hill, another well-known Julia Roberts film. But to me, the character in Pretty Woman reminded me so much of her character in Notting Hill, although obviously they're very different kind of characters. But in the sense that in Notting Hill, as in Pretty Woman, it is not so much her character, her personality, her intelligence. It is not that. It is simply her beauty that causes people to love her. If you actually think about the dialogue in Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts actually doesn't say that much. I mean, at all.
But what she does say is so powerful because it's all based on empathy. She's listening to him in a way that perhaps others haven't or have ignored because of his money. And she's talking, she says, right, the therapy that she's going to provide him is better than any therapist he could ever get. The way that she listens to the David Morse character, Ralph Bellamy's nephew. Yeah. And again, the way she listens also to Ralph Bellamy, right, and relates to him. She's somebody who provides support. She's a caregiver, and that's her MO. And everybody's got to love them, an empathetic person.
Okay, fair point. But could you also say that the reason why she is so winning, and she's the one who really breaks through Richard Gere's shell, his emotional shell, is because we see he has just broken up with a girlfriend when the film starts. We see another one of his ex-girlfriends, and presumably they're also from this higher social status. They are maybe their own sort of powerful working women. And so the devil's advocate might say that he is only really attracted to Julia Roberts because the power dynamic in their relationship is always going to be that way. She is always going to be maybe she'll get her GED, right? But we're told she didn't finish high school, right? She obviously hasn't gone to college. They met on Hollywood Boulevard. And so I think, is it the case that he will always, in a sense, be above her? That the idea, the very anti-feminist idea, right, is that these women who have been his equals, he could not commit emotionally to them. He can commit emotionally to her, not only because of the empathy, which I agree is important, but because she is not a challenge to him in the spheres where he now has to experience actual working women. Working women, not using it as code for sex workers, but actual working women.
I would argue the opposite. I would argue she is a challenge for him for exactly those reasons. That the women he has dated before, while not his equals, are more sort of like a Gordon Gekko, Daryl Hannah vibe.
Okay.
All right, decorators.
Yes.
Right? Not
making a reference to Wall Street.
Okay, not exactly CEOs themselves, but people who are familiar with that
in that world.
And Julia Roberts, because he hasn't been around real people for a long time, right? People who don't live in that world is a challenge for him. And at the end, when, she says, well, what happens after he saves her, and she says she saves him right back, that testifies to a sort of equality in that relationship, or at least equal things being earned on either side. And we can question whether that's true or not, but there is an authenticity to her that he finds challenging. And she's also feistier than perhaps some of his other girlfriends, because she isn't willing to accept some of the things that he does, or she isn't willing to accept how people treat her, and she isn't in the end in it for the money.
Well, that actually leads to a question that I wanted to ask you, which goes back to Anora. Why in this film, why in Pretty Woman, does Julia Roberts' character need to be a sex worker? That is, why can't she be working at McDonald's or she's a delivery driver to his hotel room or something? What is it other than obviously the plot issue, right? That but she's just standing on the sidewalk. And so why can't she be plain old regular poor woman who never finished high school who's standing on the sidewalk and they meet?
She needs to be a sex worker because the device of the film is that he needs a, quote, professional for the week, that he can't deal with real emotional ties. I mean, he could get, like she says, you know, you're a rich, classy guy. Why don't you go out and get yourself a
nice girlfriend?
Nice girlfriend for this week. You know, and he says, no, I have to go to these business meetings and I need a companion and I don't want it to be somebody where there's this messy romantic stuff involved. Him with the naive assumption that he won't have feelings for her.
And I think what tripped me up with that, though, and in part, I mean, the whole structure of the film, it really couldn't be otherwise. Because, of course, she's not a high-class courtesan who is used to mixing with these people at that social level. So the whole irony of the film is that he says, yes, I need someone to accompany me on these things. But of course, she doesn't know how to eat. She doesn't know what fork to use.
She sits on the table.
She sits on the table. She's super crude. She has no manners.
But as we learn, she is teachable in
yes.
a matter of
days.
With the right wardrobe, with one meeting on etiquette, with the right stylist and the right
everything is different.
Goodman saleswoman, all is well.
All is well. And so certainly, I guess we could argue, right, that's someone else's fantasy, yes. Right? And we talked about this is the origin of Anora. But this is another perfect male fantasy, right? The hooker that I pick up on Hollywood Boulevard for $50. She's
Marshall
going to be a queen tomorrow.
Is a fan of My Fair Lady.
Yes, very much so. But I think that was, to me, and I do hear you about the empathy, but something else that was so, not surprising to me, it made sense, but I think, again, is interesting in comparison to Anora. The movie is so chaste.
Yes.
Right. It is so chaste. There's we don't see her with a previous John. She makes reference, right, to being with other men. She initiates contact with him,
yes.
Right, when they're back at the hotel room.
Right.
So we have
watching I Love Lucy.
Watching I Love Lucy. So she's not a shrinking violet. Okay, we do know why she has entered into sex work, unlike in Anora, right? We're told explicitly that she did work fast food, but then for whatever reason, we don't know why she decided to enter sex work, to become a hooker. She met Kit, who said
that it's going to be great and it's easy money. And I know some people, and you know,
there you go. But you're not going to have a pimp. We're going to stay away from the pimp Carlos.
We say how, we say when, we say how much.
That's it. But then, of course, we just see her with Richard Gere in these more very romantic, you know, kind of making love scenarios, you know, lingering in bed and having the breakfast in the bathroom.
On the piano.
The piano was the most and I was like, people are around. That was definitely the most risque. But no nudity, right? No nudity.
Which is in her clause.
Yes. No lap dances. No. Obviously, unlike Anora, where we said so many lap dances.
And even a body double in the beginning.
Good point.
Very famously. That
good point.
When she's getting dressed in the very beginning in that, again, what's now iconic outfit, that is not her.
Yes. So, I don't know. I do think it is a dated film, but I think obviously it is the fairy tale, right? Which Anora pretends not to be in some ways, but also Anora embraces in other ways. And one of the things that I kept thinking of while watching Pretty Woman is, well, all right, when they have children together and they're having conversations with their children who say, Mommy, how did you and Daddy meet? And is Richard Gere going to say, I picked your mommy up on Hollywood Boulevard when she was a hooker?
But of course we know he's not going to say that, because by the time that Jason Alexander propositions her, she has moved beyond thinking of herself as a hooker.
Yes.
And Richard Gere says to her, I don't mean to point out the obvious, but you
are
a hooker.
You are a hooker.
And she seems surprised by that.
I agree. She does.
And so the narrative is that she has transcended being a hooker in the duration of the relationship with Richard Gere, which is why at the end, before he comes to get her, we see her packing up. She's going to move to San Francisco.
Do something else, get her GED.
She's now in a sweater and jeans, and
Yes.
she's definitely in casual Julia Roberts, not sex worker Julia
Not
Roberts.
sex worker.
And so she no longer sees herself that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so her parents will get her children will get a very different story, as will her parents. Actually.
That's true.
Of how did you meet Richard Gere?
Okay, so we have then, just to sort of sum up for a second, so we have Anora, which is not a good film, which we both absolutely hated. I don't think is too strong of a word.
No, it's not.
And which I do think in 10 years will be as much looked upon as much an Oscars mistake as Crash winning Best Picture.
I don't think anyone will remember Anora at all.
that may be the case. Unless they bought the thong and they still have the Anora thong hanging around in their dresser. Why didn't Pretty Woman? Pretty Woman should have sold blonde wigs.
In those days, the merch situation
I know. It was not as sophisticated.
Not as sophisticated.
Yeah.
And if you really look, I would have been the first to go out and buy that outfit. That white tank top with the tie-dye blue mini skirt and those boots.
Yeah.
At least for a costume. if not every day.
And the red blazer.
If
Right,
not,
the red blazer.
everyday wear.
Yeah.
So and the polka dot dress, that she wears to the polo match, was replicated in spades.
Yes.
But there wasn't any Pretty Woman merch. You know, there wasn't a Pretty Woman thong.
There was not a Pretty Woman thong.
And I don't own the Anora thong, although I don't know. Maybe it's worth taking a look at.
So we have Anora, a movie we hated that I think is very clearly, right, a male fantasy and is so sexually explicit. Then we have Pretty Woman, which you and I disagree on, sadly. But again, we did see it at very different times in our lives.
We did. I saw it in the theater when it first came out. Julia Roberts had been in Mystic Pizza,
which I loved,
and which is wonderful, and was the only film I had ever seen her in. This is, of course, Pretty Woman made her a star. I had loved Richard Gere already, and so it was a very, very magical moment for me to see Pretty Woman in the theater in its heyday.
Understood. And we have, though, Pretty Woman, which is a very chaste film, again, in the exact opposite of Anora. And now we want to talk about a third sex worker film, which is very different, I would argue, in that it is really focusing, well, first of all, it is focusing on sex, but it is chaste in its own way. And most importantly, it is not a male fantasy. It is all about female sexuality and female sexual empowerment. And this is the French film, Belle de Jour, which came out in 1967.
Now, I'll admit, I had not seen Belle de Jour since a film class in college many, many years ago, and Christine let me know that it was streaming on Max, and that she had recently watched it, and that it was very, very provocative, and that it had inspired her to think about it comparatively with Anora. So I watched it, and I enjoyed it, and I felt that it captured a kind of complexity and a kind of dynamism that is probably lacking in both Pretty Woman and Anora.
So just a short recap. Belle de Jour, again, it came out in 1967, and it was directed by a pretty famous director, a man called Louis Buñuel, who did a bunch of films and was very involved with the art movement called Surrealism. And he based the film, Belle de Jour, on an earlier novel, a novel that had come out in the 1920s. And the film is about a woman called Séverine who lives in the city of Paris. And she has very particular sexual desires, a interest in being humiliated, in masochism. And at the same time, she is in a marriage with her very handsome, affluent doctor husband in their beautiful apartment in Paris. And their relationship is frigid. They have no sex life at all. And so what we see in the course of the film is Séverine decides to become an afternoon prostitute at a brothel in Paris. And this is what the name means. The title of the film means basically beauty of the day, Belle de Jour. And so she works afternoon hours before her husband comes home from work, and complications ensue, Lauren.
Yes, many complications ensue. So the interesting things about Séverine and Belle de Jour. Séverine is someone who is, unlike Anora, has an inner monologue about why she gets into sex work. We know why she gets into sex work. She cannot fulfill the kind of sexual fantasies that she wishes to within her marriage, and so she seeks them elsewhere as a sex worker in this brothel, as Christine said, after one of her husband's friends mentioned that he had visited this brothel. And she does so quite tentatively. She does so with a lot of ambivalence. And in fact, when she gets there, the first few times, she actually has to be tutored and instructed by the other sex workers and the madam on what to do, how to present herself, and also on how to transition from this sort of classy, quite beautiful woman to a sort of common sex worker in her wardrobe, in her hair, and in her mannerisms.
Although at the same time, that is part of her appeal.
Yes.
In the brothel, that she is different from the two other women who are serving as prostitutes. That she has this elegance. And certainly one of the most important marks of that elegance, in addition to the actress Catherine Deneuve being exceptionally beautiful, is the clothes that she wears.
Right. And
one of the most interesting things about Belle de Jour is that the costuming was done by a very young, at the time, designer, Yves Saint Laurent. And the clothes are
magnificent.
Fantastic.
They are timeless pieces that we would wear today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Meaning me and Christine,
yes.
but I think many women, and we see all sorts of shift dresses and amazing shoes and raincoats and ensembles that are exquisite and that really represent her sense of being classic and contemporary, but also quite buttoned up. In her quote normal life with her husband. And as a sex worker, we see her in a slip, we see her in her maybe stockings and bra. But there is a real difference between Séverine out in the wardrobing and Séverine in the costuming outside of the brothel versus inside the brothel.
And this is something else that is a really interesting comparison with both Anora and Pretty Woman. Anora is wearing shitty t-shirts, right? Things that are ripped up, even if she's dressed. And there is this sense that she is wearing basically clothes that we might call trashy. On the other hand, as we've already discussed, there is a clear and explicit evolution in the clothes of Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. She starts out with this real sort of hooker outfit with the boots and the wig, and she becomes more and more elegant as the film goes on.
With the climax as the opera
dress, and of course the beautiful diamond necklace,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
But what is again so striking about Belle de Jour is that we have a consistent image of Séverine, that this is an elegant, beautiful, wealthy, bourgeois woman, a Parisian, who doesn't need to look slutty in any way.
But who nonetheless moves between spaces.
But I would argue moves between spaces much less. But obviously, she can't exist in the brothel wearing a buttoned up to the neck dress,
no.
Right? She has to put on the dressing gown. She has to wear her bra and slip. But there isn't a sense, right, that she as a quote-unquote real person, right? With both Anora and Pretty Woman, we are seeing them outside of a brothel, outside of those spaces. But there is a sense, I think, of consistency in her clothes. And as you point out, she is so buttoned up, she is so covered up, that there isn't a sense of sort of sexual license, right? And in part, the friend of the husband that Lauren mentioned, he is so sexually attracted to Severine in her quote unquote real life because she is buttoned up, because she seems so untouchable. And when he later encounters her in the brothel, this friend of the husband doesn't want her anymore, precisely because she is sexually
Well, he's
available.
also said, your virtue is what drew
Yeah,
me to
exactly.
you. And now I know you're not a virtuous woman and you're just a hoe like the rest of
Yes.
them. So forget that.
So forget that. And one of the other things that is, as Lauren mentioned before, we absolutely know why she wants to be a sex worker. She has particular sexual desires that need to be satisfied that her husband cannot satisfy. Now, we don't exactly know why the husband can't satisfy this need for humiliation, degradation that is driving her to the brothel.
Right. And what's interesting, bringing this comparison to yet another film, to Baby Girl, right, where Nicole Kidman's character says to Antonio Banderas, I want these things, and for some reason he can't
Can't
fulfill
do it.
them.
Mystery, why not?
We don't know why not.
We don't know why
but
not.
in 1967, when the vocabulary is not what it is in 2025, while the modern feminist movement is evolving and changing and women's sexuality is contested, we can understand in a better sense why her husband may not be game for the kind of degradation she's up for.
An exploration of that sexuality. And they're a couple that is still sleeping in twin beds, as we see. A la Mike and Carol Brady, to use a very Gen X reference.
Right. We get the sense that her husband has a very traditional sense of sexuality, if that, and that he is, again, they talk about children at some point. They talk about love. They talk about bourgeois, white, middle class norms. They're not talking about her desire to have mud thrown at her.
Let's go to the swingers club.
Or to be whipped, or to any of the things that we see in her fantasy life.
Yes. And this is something that is so important narratively about Belle de Jour. And so many of the questions that Lauren and I had, for example, about Anora, right? Why is she doing this? What is the setting? What are the issues with money? All of these things. This is done so well and so economically in Belle de Jour.
Yes.
And we know through what are clearly dreams, sexual fantasies, we see so perfectly that she has that desire to be humiliated. Again, things thrown at her, servants abusing her. This is made exceptionally clear.
But it is also incredibly interesting in the context of comparing with these other two films to see a film where sex work is detached from money.
Absolutely.
There is no question that Severine cares about money, wants money from her customers. She doesn't need it. She doesn't want it. And in fact, with one of her customers she says,
you can see me for free.
Don't even pay me. You can see me for free. And that's a very different conversation than Julia Roberts or Mikey Madison have with their suitors or customers, however you want to think about it, where there is an arrangement that I'm going to be spending a week with you and this is how much it's going to be, and we're going to negotiate.
And it's going to be a transaction, and the relationship is transactional.
And it is not transactional in the same way in Belle de Jour.
Because it's made very clear that she is getting paid, but what she is getting paid in is satisfaction, sexual satisfaction. And one of the most, I think, famous scenes in Belle de Jour is the idea that we see a John, a customer, who has a mysterious box. And we never see what is in the box. It is shown to the three sex workers, Severine included. The other two women are repelled by it, horrified by it. Severine, though, it sends her, when she has an actual episode with this man and his mysterious box, she is sent into sexual rapture, so much that she can barely recover afterwards. And so there absolutely is this sense. She is getting what she wants, right, out of this relationship. Now, it later spins out of control.
But not without consequences.
But not without consequences.
Because like Richard Gere, she assumes there can be relationships without romantic attachments.
But there are not.
And there are not. And she has a customer later on in the film that becomes incredibly attached to her and that demands all sorts of things from her, seeing her at night, for instance, which she cannot do. that will lead to chaos. And that is a sort of downfall of her as a sex worker. And again, it's interesting that her unrealistic expectations of separating one life from another are what lead to destruction in a way that's very, very different than Anora.
Yes, and that's the idea, certainly for Severine, right? That the work can remain work in compartmentalization of time, even, right? And that's something where in Anora we see really explicitly that the sex work at the strip club is then expanded out in terms of time, right? Which is then what enables the marriage. But Severine has this idea, right? That the work can remain simply work, even though she herself then encourages the blurring of these boundaries by saying, you can see me for free, you can see me other times.
And again, also unlike Pretty Woman, Severine sees work as a 9-to-5 job. She thinks about work in very conventional ways and, again, can only be employed when her husband is at work. She operates in simultaneous hours with her husband, where Julia Roberts, again, once Richard Gere makes her the offer, she's at work full-time for the week.
All the time.
And the idea of women's work something that was debated and the center of feminist politics at the time. And I think that Belle de Jour is contributing to that conversation and really thinking about what women's work entails. And the parameters of it, the boundaries of it, the amount of agency that women can have in controlling their own work and who they work with.
And the fact that sometimes your work is wanting to be humiliated, which is, I think, a lesson for so many of us. Okay, so these are all three films that are so, and obviously we could have talked about so many more films with sex workers. They are legion. But I think maybe we will finish this segment, and this is something we'll try to do in our pod. And we are going to issue a book recommendation for anyone who is interested in maybe reading a little bit more about the things that Lauren and I are talking about. Lauren and I will sometimes think hard about a book that will be fun and interesting for what we call the general reader. That is not anyone who is a historian, but just someone who is interested in knowing a little bit more about what we're talking about. And the book that I wanted to recommend for anyone who's interested in learning more about the history of sex work is a book by a woman called Deborah Hamel, and that's Hamel. And she wrote a book called Trying Neiara. That's Neira. And this is a really interesting story. It's a true story of a sex worker in ancient Greece in the 4th century BC. And Neira's story is so interesting because she is bought by a madam of a brothel at a pretty young age. And so she lives in the brothel for a while, and then she's actually bought by two men, two friends who, in effect, and it sounds kind of gross, want to share her as a sex slave. And they eventually set her free when they decide that they want to marry. And Neiara herself then goes on and marries a man in Athens, and they're married for decades. But she is put on trial actually for being an illegal immigrant in Athens. It's a really interesting story, again, so quirky and fascinating, and tells us a lot about sex work in the ancient past.
So my recommendation is going to be The Murder of Helen Jewett by Patricia Klein Cohen. And this is a young woman, Helen Jewett, who was a sex worker in antebellum America, who was murdered in 1836. And she had refashioned her identity several times. She had moved through New York City and other areas. And the book really does a tremendous job of reconstructing the narratives around sex work, around class, and around both ideas of femininity, masculinity in this moment of Jacksonian America. And it tells you as much about the values, about family relationships, about the trial itself, which was the sort of trial of its century, similar to sort of, we think of the OJ trial or some other big trials that have happened. But Helen Jewett was one of the first sort of sensational figures to be debated even after her death, which was highly contested due to the wealth of the accused. So I recommend it, The Murder of Helen Jewett, if you'd like to learn more about American history in the 19th century.
You know, this is a reminder, Lauren, that prostitution is the world's oldest profession, as they say. Okay, so just the last thing we're going to do before we say goodbye is we are going to do some harping or some loving very briefly. That is, we will try each time in the pod to either harp on something for a minute or love on something.
Love it up.
So,
first, Christine, I have to say, even though this will break the rules, that I love you for figuring out all the technology of this podcast, which is not my skill set, and I have learned is yours.
I'm not sure I would go that far, but thank you, and I love you too.
So what is your harp for the week?
Okay, I'm going to say this very quickly. My harp for the week is the close on Gossip Girl. I am watching Gossip Girl for the very first time, and I will say I love the close. What I don't love about the close is that I feel like everybody has the same template. That is, for example, on Sex and the City, obviously, right? You saw Carrie wear lots of different kinds of outfits, sometimes shorts and a tube top, sometimes an elegant gown, and I feel like every single character, right? It's Blair, for example, and Serena. The mini skirt, the tights, the spike heels, right? Lily, the statement. Actually, everyone wears the 5-pound statement necklaces, right? But the statement necklace, the elegant outfit, the hair up. I just feel like there is not enough adaptation and diversity in the clothes, however beautiful they are. You know, if I were assigned to house arrest, I think I would be wearing sweatpants and not my big statement necklace and Chanel skirt. So I want more breadth.
The sweatpants might be made by Chanel.
True. Good point. But something a little bit more casual. That is my harp for the week.
Well noted. Well noted. Okay. My harp for the week, tying back to the first part of the pod where I talked about college acceptances. One would think that when your child is accepted to college, it is just, you can just dust your hands off and it's a great job and it's a celebratory moment and your kid goes off and you wish them well. Well, the first thing that happens is you have to create a portal, which is different than the portal that you created when the kid applied. Then, if you'd like to see if you got any financial aid, you need to create another portal. Then, if you'd like to learn about housing, you create another portal, and on and on and on. And these portals all have different passwords and different login names and different relationships to one another. And the agony of creating these portals, which are supposed to be done by a 17-year-old teenager, no matter how technologically adept, can't happen without some kind of parental oversight, which is unnecessary and just completely fucked. And as an employee of a university, I really hope our own university doesn't require all of these
the portals.
But it is a labyrinth of technological mayhem. And I ask that it stop. And I ask that we could just confine it to one portal. You got in, here's your money or not, and here's your roommate or not, and welcome.
Welcome.
Not, let's drive your parents insane.
They're just trying to see how badly you want it, Lauren. How many portals you are willing to go through in order to get to paradise.
So I am harping on the portals and I am begging universities out there, make it stop and let us enjoy our wonderful children who have worked really hard to get into your schools. You also need a portal to find out if you've gotten rejected. So it works both ways.
The rejection portal. I feel like I've walked through the rejection portal many times in my own life. Well, that is Lauren's harp for the week, and I had my harp. So I think now we will say goodbye.
And we hope, listeners, you will return for the next episode of History Harpies. And peace out.
Peace out. Harpies out.